I think I've had some conversations about this with people. Discovered that this is or maybe discovered is the wrong word, that we're on this land of the Ohlone and the Mukwema Ohlone people who trace their ancestry through the missions Dolores, Santa Clara, and San Jose. And so in Canada, we think a lot about land and place when we do our work, or trying to think about it more. And I wanted to think about that too while we get to be here today. So our first talk is going to be, is up already, and I have lost my place because I'm very organized. Acorn Beyond Scrum, Project Management for the Distributed Open Source World Using State of Affairs Tree with Eric and Will. And so each speaker will have 5 minutes for a talk and 3 minutes for Q&A, and we can be a little bit soft on that, but I am going to set a timer just to try and make sure we keep moving. So welcome, Eric and Will.
Hi, everyone. So I'm really excited about this, and my top goal for this talk is that people get as excited as I am. How many people have done Scrum or Agile development? Raise your hand. That's a good number of people. All right, so I'm one of the developers in the Holochain team, and in working on Holochain, we used Scrum as how we did our software development process, and we came up with some problems with Scrum in the context of a worldwide distributed team. Scrum is designed for people to be in the same room at the same time. And Scrum is also designed for loops that are 2 weeks with a core team that is very steady, and people keep coming back, and they know each other very well, and they know their process. And the other thing that Scrum does is it typically relies on Kanban boards. So when you're trying to see what your project is, you see a backlog, you see what's in progress, and you see what gets done. But it's really hard to see the state of affairs of the whole project that's happening. So we created this idea of having a dependency tree of what's going on in your project and being able to build out the dependency tree in an agile way. And here is a dependency tree of this very talk that we're giving. And you will see that what is represented are what we would call inspiring intended outcomes. Each one of these are something that we want to have happen in a dependency as you represent the whole project. The items in red are, so one of the other big key things about Scrum is that you're trying to understand how, what the flow of the project is and when things get done and what it needs to happen for something else to happen. So we color things, you can probably all guess, right? The red is something that you don't know how long it's going to take. The yellow is something that you know that it's bigger than something that takes a small amount of time, which is the things at the very bottom of the tree, or what we call the smalls, and they're the things that are really easy and manageable and you can take and do, and when they're done, you complete them. So this is an example tree that you hopefully all got to see. Now I'd like to switch to another example, what it looks like for the Holochain team itself. This is our dependency tree for building out Holochain core. And you can see that the top, we call this acorn because it's a tree and the squirrel runs around the tree and figures things out, right? And it gets acorns, that's like the great thing. In Scrum, you have these 2-week cycles. We call the cycles that you create, they can run on the fly, we call them squirreling, which is also why there are squirrels on the acorn tree. So this is our inspiring intended outcome at the root of the Holochain tree. We want that to happen. And you will see that we have created all kinds of other dependencies in this graph of what is needed to make that happen. So if you're actually doing work, what you do is you go very, very far down to the bottom of the tree and you pick something yellow off the left that you might be working on. Let's go into here and see what it is that needs to be worked on. Aha. This has to happen. You keep moving on. Here, this one. Zoom in, just a sec. So we have to have that this bit of code gets created and gets run at a given point in time. So as we're coding, we pick this stuff off. In the other tree, where are we jumping to?
Here?
Yeah, that's one example. We could look at the integration squad, which is another part of the work that we're doing. We have another tree built out that helps describe and figure out what we're up to as we go.
That's a pretty one.
That one's good enough. I'm just showing you that there's different possibilities. Now, one of the things that's difficult is when you have this huge tree, how do you navigate it? How do you see the dependencies? So we're building out a bunch of tools that will let us do that. This one that I want to show you is called the climbing harness. Where did it go?
It's not running here.
Oh, darn it.
No.
Is it gone? Because my computer went.
I might not have reloaded. We can show you.
Oh, there you go. Fine. So we can do stuff like, oh, no we can't. Talk fail.
No, your computer just.
Is that what it is? Because it's actually, the code is running off of this computer, but it shouldn't have been.
Oh.
All right, well, so that was one of the tools we built. Why don't you actually pop to the GitHub repo where that is, where we're building out these tools. What you see is written and is being used in Miro, which is just a drawing tool. It does a really good job because it has that zooming effect, so you can see at scale, you can see the whole thing, or you can see the little part that you want. And this is available for people who want to play with. You have to get an account on Miro for now, but where we want to go with it is to actually create a holochain-based user interface and backend, and run this directly off of Holochain itself. But you know, we have Holochain to build in the meantime. So I don't know if that was 5 minutes, but I think I'm done.
Yeah. Perfect timing.
Any questions?
When I was reading about this and then throughout the presentation, the method kind of reminds me of what Eli Goldratt talks about as current reality trees and future reality trees that in some books he wrote in like the 80s. Have you heard of that or that author?
I have not, but that sounds really cool. I'm sure this has to have been done before because everything is a dependency graph. And one thing is, and the future past thing, this stuff right here in the red and green and yellow is functional dependencies. You can also add other kinds of dependencies in. So we put the blue ones or the teal ones, we call them temporal dependencies. So you can put your milestones in there, or they can even be like prioritization or emotional dependencies of like what is important to you, what's the pull for making this happen. And you can represent that as a separate dimension in your tree, and part of what we want to do in the tools that we build out is actually be able to visualize those multidimensional ways of looking into the project that you're working on. Other questions?
Are there dead limbs, and if there are, do they disappear?
They ought to, but not in this tool. So what we would love to be able to do is mind map stuff that would collapse this down, and then you would see a little node that you could see the history on it, and so that all gets flowed down. The other thing, there's a ton of things that we want to be able to do, which is when you click on one of these, or a very high pull, that it actually shows you the leftmost 5 nodes, so you know what to work on next. So it's like a tree-based Kanban board.
How much of your time do you spend just arranging the board? Because that would be my concern with something like this. Would be like, I'd be like spending all my time making space for new boxes, and I wouldn't be typing my actual tasks and things I want to do.
Well, it's interesting because there is a fair amount of time, right? And that would be the same thing as backlog grooming that you would do in Scrum. You spend a lot of time thinking about what the priority is and moving things up and down in your backlog and thinking about the text. But when you represent this stuff and move it around, in this tool, it's all manual because it's just a drawing tool. When we actually write our own UI with it, then there'll be all kinds of automated stuff where as you type, it'll put the boxes in, you can move the order, you could draw stuff manually. Currently, there's a lot of manual grooming, but it's actually part of the thinking process about what this tree, what the dependency relationships are in the project that you're working on. So I think it's actually valuable.
This is what the navigation tool for larger trees looks like, even though it's not working currently. We have this node selected, and then it just gives us a list of all the children, all the parents. So if they're really far away, you can see them immediately, and then you can click on them and it goes to them.
Right, and so you can also imagine if we had a separate access to that, you could have it actually trace down and recursively go to the bottom of the tree and show you the ones that are needed for working next.
Can we run it decentralized on a mesh?
Not this user interface is Miro, which is a for-profit thing. It's just they're a great zoomable drawing tool, but we're writing it on Holochain, and that will be fully decentralized, and it will be an app that people can use for decentralized project management.
From a practical standpoint, I have a lot of QA people that enter tickets, and I feel like they'd have to understand the whole tree to be able to interact with this. So is this from a practical standpoint? How do you have like someone who doesn't understand the whole tree interact with it?
Where's your triage?
So the triage is over top to the right. So we have GitHub integration. When people enter in tickets in GitHub, they pop into the right into here into the inbox. And so the team, the project management team or the POs, so it's not very clean right now because this is all in process. They see these pop in and then do triage on that. They wouldn't have to understand the whole tree because we have that in there. But it's an interesting thing. To the degree to which they do understand sections of the tree, you've increased internal knowledge of your team on what's going on and what needs to happen. And this is part of decentralized open source work, where you want to be able to see the whole and make that visible to the decentralized open source team that's building that stuff.
Final question?
I missed something. Is there a way to, I mean, I can read. Is there a way to annotate?
You can, yes, you can see in the other example, yeah, there you go, annotation. You can put in whatever you want because this is
No,
just
I
a
mean
drawing.
highlight something and write about it.
Well, in Miro you can because you can add comments in. So again, this is a drawing tool that we used, and we use their API to build stuff and make things happen. Cool.
Would it be possible to find some documentation on this methodology?
Yes, acorn squirrel, and there. Type in that long hash.
It's linked in.
It's actually the URL is in the talk description on Skip for that document. Thank you.
And if our next speaker could come up. And if you have a talk coming up in the next 20-30 minutes, I'm over on this side. Come find me quietly.
I didn't do my thing yesterday. If there is a slot today that nobody comes,
Come find me at the back and we'll sort it out. Okay, are you ready? No need? Okay, so
Yeah, nice and reading.
awesome. Please join me in welcoming Postby for P2P Accounting for Planetary Survival.
Hey all, thanks for having me. So I think the best way for me to tell a story about what's important to me is to basically just tell you a story about how I got here, because they're all rolled in together. So it's 2014, I'm doing a bit of work in some privacy activism, and then Ethereum happened and I found out about it, and suddenly I cared about blockchains. Basically I saw here was the possibility to remove middlemen from technology and bring an end to surveillance capitalism, and I got really excited. And a few months later, all that excitement gave way to disillusionment as I got deeper into the blockchain space and found that there was this prevailing techno-utopian sort of attitude, a general lack, I would say, of social awareness as to what this technology actually meant in the real world. So what I did next was really anything but unique. Perhaps like some of you here, along with my partner at the time, I sat down and together we, over a period of a couple of months, designed a model for an entire new economy, threw away all our assumptions, and created this idea around an economy that would both, heal and protect the natural environment, that would distribute wealth more equitably, and that would empower people to have a voice and agency in their choices, that would encourage gifting and social solidarity, but also, perhaps most critically in a way, an economy that would be compatible with our current economy, and that would gently encourage the systemic change that we need to fix things. And during this process, we also did a lot of research to see who else was working on similar things. And through that research, eventually found my way to the work of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation, discovered the platform cooperativism movement, and discovered this school of thought known as REA accounting. And from there, my life pretty much just changed. Because this model, this frame of thought of REA accounting could represent our model, and also a bunch of things besides that we hadn't even considered yet. And better than that, it was developed from an established body of work which had started some 40 odd years ago. And even the ISO recognized it, and there was an official working group. So we threw away our model and threw myself all into REA accounting. Because just like with the current economy, it was never really the technology that was the wicked problem or the difficult thing. It was simply getting people to believe that the vision made sense and that they should adopt it too. And so then eventually discovered Sensorica and their work, and the first open value network. Discovered their contributory economy and self-directed ecosystem of open source hardware manufacturers that could all work without requiring capital to do so. And then discovered the open app ecosystem started by Mikey Williams of Inspiral and some other Inspiral contributors, and a bunch of people from Sensorica besides. And their suite of modular UI applications which were there to support transparent, distributed and democratic organizing. And through that discovered the Value Flows protocol, which is a semantic web grammar based on the REA ontology. And I guess the short way of describing what that is to me now would be that it's a schema for the economy. And in my travels since, in every context from ultra-radical anarchist groups in Catalonia and Greece to hyper-capitalist enterprises in New York City, there's been not one economic system or coordination paradigm that I could not model in REA. So cut to today, and the Holochain workstream I'm involved with is stewarding an array of use cases in every industry from energy trading to organic agriculture to ethical investment. The Scuttlebutt REA project, started by Luandro, who's here somewhere, has been deployed to run a time bank in rural Brazil. A solid and activity hub implementation is in the works, and there's various blockchain projects such as Regen Network who are experimenting with the model as well. And besides all that, there's also various groups still iterating on and experimenting with Sensorica's original client-server system that's built on Django. But even better than all this innovation just happening in isolation, all of these projects are now converging on GraphQL as the interface to the backend system, which will eventually lead to a truly pluggable and modular systems which can create economic networks spanning and bridging between all these different sorts of technologies that I've mentioned. And so the work is complex, the paths are unknowable, and we certainly need more technical and non-technical contributors alike. But we're finding our way there, and the way forward becomes clearer every day. And I'm pretty confident now that the new economy that I glimpsed in 2014 is happening. And it's happening organically and independently and bottom up. And most of it's actually happening without me. And that's how I know it's happening the right way, because the obvious solutions don't need to be marketed or dictated or sold. The value is self-evident and people find their way to them. So I hope you'll check out the Value Flows Protocol, the concept of REA accounting, and open value networks for yourself, because our future might very well depend on those things. Thanks.
We have time for questions.
What were the two things you just mentioned at the end? Value plus protocol? And what was the other?
Value Flows Protocol.
Value close?
Value flows. Flows, as in flows of value.
Okay.
And REA accounting is the other one.
REA?
Yep. It stands for Resource Event Agent, which is sort of the fundamental parts of that grammar.
Great.
And Open Value Networks is the other interesting unit to check out.
Yeah, how do you spell Sensorica?
Sensorica. There's a couple of sessions I ran here if you find them on Shed. They've both got some links about the stuff in it. Yeah.
What's the stickiest problem that you have right now? What's the thing you know the least about or understand the least?
It's actually more things that people would want to build on top of this that are kind of more interesting to me at the moment. One is the concept of dependent demand, which is using the signals from an economic supply system to automatically predict how much you need to produce, so you don't overproduce or underproduce. The other one that's really interesting is using some level of machine learning, but also just better interfaces and systems to optimize for like economic loop closures and localization, and sort of try and deal with flows of value without needing money as lubricant in that process. If you're asking what we need help on developments, so Rust and JavaScript devs, stop mentioning. Yeah,
so first, there's a large amount of inefficiency in supply chains right now that this can help with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second, what kind of economic intermediation would this provide that's very different from the current paradigm?
Economic intermediation.
Like the accountant. Right now, it's like you sign a contract and haggle over a price. It seems like there's some fundamental.
I guess the biggest difference, if I'm reading the question right, is about having an open protocol to connect that economic data between enterprises and between silos. So it's about, for a producer within a supply chain, it's about having more visibility into your upstream suppliers and what they're doing, so that you can pass those assertions on down to the people that you're producing for. Is that good enough of an answer? Yeah. Thing?
Certification.
Yes.
How does that tie into certification? How do you see it changing what certification looks like?
Perhaps also partially answering the previous question, because you are recording the real resources and the real materials on the ground as you're accounting, for certifications and also for compliance and for generating reports and stuff, you can generate that all from the same data set. So there's a way that you can do certification without having to do any certification work. Yep.
I'm working on a cooperative on business models for journalism. We're already publishing. So if I wanted to unite some of the ideas that we just talked about, what would it go?
So there's the Value Flows website is probably the main place that has a lot of high-level information. That's at valueflo.ws. FLO.ws, yeah. There's another good one. These are more like case studies, so you can see how some of this has been used in practice. So there's locecon.org, locecon.org. And sorry, LOCECON. Yeah. And the other one's probably Micro Risel's website, which is a consulting company that's been doing this stuff for a while, which is at mikorizal.org.
Final question? Extra time for applause. Thank you so much. Peter, come up and join.
And you have HDMI?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And you already have your...
I've got my, okay, I need your dongle too, if your dongle works. Let's just do
We
that
were
one.
having some troubles.
Okay,
so
well let's use
your dongle
mine.
might
Okay. Mine's tried and true.
Okay.
Except for now. These things never work.
Now that we're putting it on the spot.
Right. So I've got 5 minutes. If I absolutely refuse applause, can I get 6?
Sure.
All right.
Okay. So
Fantastic.
Please join me in welcoming Peter for a talk, Rethinking Decentralization as Orthogonality.
Yes. All right. So we here at Decentralized Web Camp, I'm going to try to do 2 lightning talks in very little time. So first, why do I not think the word decentralization is a good one to use? Well, these are the questions that almost all of you, if you advocate for this stuff, have probably been asked. You know, and the answer, and I was like, you know, I don't have great answers for these, right? So if we start from the bottom up, you know, centralized actors, actually it's easier to manipulate them, or not manipulate, but to fix them and to regulate them and control them. Isn't that better than a pile of book bags with WhatsApp decentralized? Well, I guess WhatsApp's not decentralized, but, you know, the decentralized stuff gets, you know, more anarchistic and harder to control, right? So better centralized actors, and the problem with better centralized actors, of course, is that they're stuck in their mode where they're at from a business perspective. And then also, centralized actors are not always good Western democracies like ours that reflect the will of the people. They can actually be used to do bad things. So then also, you know, what's to stop decentralization becoming horrible? Really nothing. At the end of the day, we create decentralized infrastructure. People are free to communicate they want to create the way they want to communicate. And my thing here is that, you know, we can create a level playing field, for at least a level playing field for the good guys. But that's still kind of a hand-wavy, sort of wishy-washy sort of thing. And the answer, and then the other question that I get asked a lot is, why won't things just re-centralize if we decentralize them? And it's like, you know what? Yeah, pretty much. I think so, right? So that's why our goal should not be to decentralization. Okay? And why not? Because it connotes this process of disrupting our current status quo. We've correctly identified our vulnerabilities now stemming from certain kinds of centralized capture, but it doesn't suggest a vision of something better to replace it with. And furthermore, it suggests a topological fix, and I don't think our problems are purely topological. And so I talk about orthogonality. I think there's 3 critical elements of a communication and information system that need to be held orthogonal to each other. That means they cannot be used to capture the other, and that's what I mean by orthogonal, 90 degrees to each other. So what I call 3 pillars of information freedom: data, so data integrity, security, resilience, provenance, and all these kinds of things. Transport, the transport layer has its own set of concerns and values, and then identity, and all the things we want around identity. So we can accurately attribute the data, we can accurately identify where the transport goes. All 3 legs affect each other, but all 3 legs need to be able to be put together in an orthogonal way. Right now, as you look at it this way, if you look at any current infrastructure built on TCP/IP, built on top of the current internet, ARPANET really, you do not have this orthogonality. And that's where a lot of our collapse of the current system comes in. So the design space, furthermore, if you actually go to this orthogonal mode, if you solve for orthogonality, you see there's a much bigger design space than merely decentralization. we can actually think about how to design for attention management without sacrificing other things. We can talk about how to do robust data attribution, create really decentralized and slow connected but very secure information systems that can persist across difficult, say, sovereign or otherwise adversarial environments. And furthermore, the other thing is, if we just fix our decentralization, guess who's going to do decentralization really well? Apple, Google, Cisco, Samsung. All of them are going to move to mesh-based IoT edge learning things. If we're not able to express our concerns about failure in the sense of orthogonality, we're going to get decentralized infrastructure that still preserves centralized command and control. So orthogonality gives us a philosophic and architectural principle to start from to talk about this particular failure mode. Because this is what's happening. The world is sailing into this. And for those of you who are not familiar with 5G, the amount of information that will happen at the edge in 5G makes it essentially critical for the current cloud-based companies, hardware and software, to create edge-based, mesh-based, decentralized control systems. So that's why we need to talk about these three pillars of information freedom and talk about why orthogonality and preserving user agency in each of these domains is really the thing we're solving for. So orthogonality rather than decentralization. How much time do I have left? A minute. Privacy. Who thinks privacy is important? Here. Who likes privacy? Right. Why do we want privacy? Don't answer because I don't have much time. But I've been asking this question. Literally since I was debating about PGP with my sysop on my BBS back in 1993. And I've really never, this is the ugly truth, I care about it, but I've never gotten a really good answer about it, except I don't want people to know what porn I'm browsing, it's my right, and just because. And I came up with a better articulation, I think, and it's that privacy gives us the space to develop our identity and our sense of self. It's not a place to hide stuff and like, oh, I'm really into like furries or whatever. It's actually about the place where I get to be me and I get to play around with who I want the future me to be. Privacy fosters human development, not just for myself. For individuals, lets us develop identity and who we are. We can play with these things. If we have a lack of privacy, that means what we believe about ourselves cannot diverge from what others believe about us and what others are exposed to. Privacy also, between individuals, for peer-wise interactions, it's the place, it's the fundament from which you can build trust and intimacy. And then for groups, it's the place where you can build new, this is a lot of jargon, but intersubjective infrastructure. We create new belief systems, new culture, all the concepts of inside jokes. Any of you who's been through middle school understand this at a visceral level. You don't have the teacher or all the other kids listening to your inside jokes. These are things we're wired with at our brainstem level. They're part of human development and cultural development. Digital deadbolt. We have no digital deadbolt. If you think about a hotel room, we all have deadbolts and those little privacy locks in them. We all know the hotel manager has a master key, but the person inside the room ultimately has the say over whether the door is locked or not. We don't have a digital equivalent of this, and users know it. And what that means is it makes us then not be able to actually be our full selves, be fully vulnerable, and do that kind of personal development. I've got to think about trust and some other kind of shit. But anyway, that's it. Thank you very much. Do you have time for questions?
Slightly less
Okay.
time for questions.
Yes.
Can you talk, you didn't talk as much about what you really mean by orthogonality. Can you expose that a little more?
Yes, by orthogonality, what I mean is that a breach of one or vulnerability or capture of one does not compromise the others.
Can you give an example?
Yes, so for instance, right now, HTTPS, right, you log into Gmail, so that's your data. Google can see it because they terminate the HTTPS connection. Anybody in the search chain up and down can man in the middle of the search chain and can see the traffic. So basically, by compromising transport, I can get access to your data. Okay, if I have secure, like government level secure encryption of everything, we start from there. If transport is vulnerable, you still don't know who you're talking to. You might be sending your data to somebody else who shouldn't see it, right? So right now, there's a lot of correlation between these different things. And if we exploit one or the other or whatever, we can get a lot of information. There's a lot of metadata leakage because of how this data communicates in our protocols. That just by, even if you can't see the data, you can see who's talking to who. That's a leak of this, right? And so back and forth. We get spam because of this, right? We can't move off Facebook groups because everybody's there, and that capture, that wall, that digital moat is there because we don't have a robust, non-centralized way of doing identity. The self-sovereign identity we'll talk about, every identity you have in the world today digitally is rented from somebody, right? That's why they talk about self-sovereign identity. Next question. Another question? Yes, there.
This sounds great, but in practice it seems so difficult to really make these three concepts work. Do you think it's even possible?
I would love for other people to think with me about these things to see if it's possible. And if it's not entirely possible, if we can identify the stages of difficulty, right? We can say, well, just sort of like Arrow's incompleteness theorem for voting systems, you cannot meet these 5 criteria. Every voting system, satisfies 3 or 4 of them, but never all 5 or something like that. If we can have the similar kind of conservation thing of you're going to get 2 of these things, 1 of those, and 1 of the other, that's a great thing to know about the design space.
At least you understand.
At least you understand, yes, the design space. Right.
Digital deadbolt Faraday cage.
Sorry, digital deadbolt Faraday cage?
Yes, a citadel. Each individual should have their own data set.
So air gap, right?
Yes.
The problem is the sound of your typing can go through the air gap. A microphone on the other side of the Faraday cage will pick up what you're typing. And based on a whole bunch of other additional inference parameters, I can use machine learning to get winnow down.
It's the best deadbolt we have. It's toward the deadbolt.
Right. I think this needs to happen on multiple layers of architecture.
Yes, individual responsibility.
But at the physical EM layer is absolutely one of the important things. Yes. And that was it?
You can sneak one more.
One more. Sneak one more in.
Tell me like the politics of this.
The politics of doing this?
Yes.
This is about empowering people to do sense making, robust sense making with each other and the small local collectives, as opposed to deriving their view of the world and the sense making structure from larger entities, which has.
Somewhere we can read a longer version.
No.
Oh.
But you can talk to me and maybe we can write something. Yeah. And that's it. And you can talk to me as I walk out the door.
That is the last question.
Yes. Thank you very much.
So I've awkwardly not thought this through, and I'm the next speaker.
You want
But
me
I
to keep
just,
time?
I'm gonna keep myself to time, and I just want to say that if Carl is here for Citadels, maybe kind of get ready to come up next. Okay, so I'm Dawn, and I said I would put in a talk about resourcing values in design. And I didn't bring the right adapter, and I don't have HDMI, so I'm just going to talk. Please come find me after I have a lot of resources. I'm more than happy to talk about this. So I wanted to sort of just highlight some resources for anyone who wants to examine and reflect about the values in the projects that they are a part of, and maybe also offer some small ways to think explicitly about those values, and particularly in the process of design. And also, because I always have to add another and, kind of against the backdrop of something which has been on my mind a lot lately, which is climate change and the climate crisis. I put up a session in the Mesh Lounge for late afternoon, and I recently reread Jem Bendel's paper on deep adaptation, so I would love to talk more about these things if you want to. And so what are values? That can be maybe a contentious thing, but I wanted to work with a very small definition, which is deeply held principles guiding decisions of individuals, groups, and organizations. And I think here at DWeb Camp, we're kind of uniquely in a space where those values are explicitly addressed in technology. I think frequently they can be unaddressed, but often and always in the room. And so technologies we work with are inevitably implicated by values. I think this has been captured succinctly by Kranzberg's law. Technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. But I wanted to also point to Langdon Winner's 1980 article, Do Artifacts Have a Politic? Or Do Artifacts Have Politics? And the example that he gives is very embodied in the built environment, and it's maybe nice to kind of have something very explicit. And this is Robert Moses, the New York City urban planner, who was involved in the decision to set the height of bridges along the route out to the beaches in New York. And so some were lower, and only cars that were largely owned by white residents could go through, whereas others were tall enough for the buses and so rendered accessible for people of color. So a lot of writing and news coverage has highlighted question around the values in technology. I think we've seen this with racial bias around like machine learning and training algorithms. You see it in facial recognition technology, or how images are getting categorized by Google, for instance. In the decentralized space, there's a lot of discussion, I think, around the negotiation between the desired values and outcomes in blockchain technologies. Oops, I lost my notes. And so I wanted to just kind of give another concept to think about this. Scholar Badia Friedman has termed this sort of relationship between the intent to design and then the way that through use that changes as interactional. So an interactional approach where the features or properties support certain values and hinder others, where the actual use of a technology will depend on the goals of those interacting with it, as well as the designers. So within academia, there's a lot of research into how to support values while you're designing. So human values through system design is kind of like a broad area. This includes things like participatory design, computer-supported cooperative work, what a mouthful, community informatics, and more. And so in addition, unpacking the values in the existing technologies, as well as thinking of how we can make the values we want to be present, are a range of civil society organizations. I wanted to point to the work of the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition, who have two concepts and a set of principles, digital justice and design justice, that they were developed through iterative and community consultation or discussion, and the principles are equal access, participation, common ownership, and work with communities. And so they make use of things like zines and toolkits that can be cheaply produced and freely shared in digital form to kind of talk about these and then think about what that might mean in future technology design. And so with my little time left, I'm just going to say that I think there are like kind of three key ways that I think about how we can just start, because I think sometimes we need to start even though it may be hard to think about, ensuring that the values you want to be in a system are present. But one, just talk about it. So one, you can ask each other questions. You can think about how to integrate it into projects you're designing. I have worked with groups where, if during a stand-up, you can make a point of sort of reflecting on this stuff. Other thing, write it down. So this can be through explicitly like vision statements. You can use tools like a priority matrix to help you prioritize what aspects you want to emphasize and which ones you want to de-emphasize in your project. You can also set up guides or rules of thumb. So I'm going to use the deep adaptation questions here as an example. So the framework of deep adaptation has 3 questions. These are like a guide to ask yourself while facing the climate crisis. So first, resilience asks us, how do we keep what we really want to keep? Second, relinquishment asks us, what do we need to let go of in order to not make matters worse? And third, restoration asks us, what can we bring back to help us with the coming difficulties and tragedies? And then the final thing I would say is we can reflect on them. I think this can be operationalized in projects through postmortems or meetings that are explicitly about having this conversation and kind of making the space to check in on it as a first wedge. So that's all I will say. And I guess I have time for questions, but I squished that a little bit, so only a couple, and it's fine if none. Okay. I will ask for more applause, though. To fill the space. So, Carl, can you come up and we'll set up your talk?
See Carl Hewitt in the room.
But I thought I heard Carl before.
No, I was just advocating his position of Citadel's.
Oh, okay.
Which is personal data.
The next speaker in the room silent for V Taiwan?
Okay.
Yeah. Are you okay if we move you up?
Yeah.
Okay. We will do that. And you want to give a talk? Are you ready to give one after?
Okay. For it's different types.
We do have a type C here. Oh, this is. No.
So is that 10 minutes?
No, I'm not. I'm waiting now.
Okay, so we'll put you in next. And is Molly in the room for iPhone? Whenever you're ready. So the next talk will be V-Taiwan and Recursive Public.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Shuyang from Taiwan, and I'm going to introduce a platform called V-Taiwan. Of course, in Taiwan, V stands for vote, voice, or virtual, you name it. It's a platform we use to experiment for prototyping open consultation process for digital regulatory reform. So in short, we want to change laws by asking people what they think and collaborate with government also. So in this scenario, we put government and citizens in the same level. No one is higher than the other. We put every stakeholder in the same level and collect opinions among all the stakeholders. So in Taiwan, we've been doing this for 5 years, since 2014, and I'm gonna just go through the process. That's cool. So what V-Taiwan is essentially, it's an experiment that, like I said, for consultation process. It's special because it brings many different kinds of stakeholders together towards a certain general topic. And we decided that the topic should be related to digital topic, digital regulatory reform only, because in this experiment, we firstly look at facilitating the process through digital tools only. V-Taiwan, if you go to one of the hackathons in V-Taiwan, it looks like this. We organize hackathons every week on weekday evening. So now it's every Wednesday evening. Lasts for around 6 hours from 6 p.m. to 12 to the midnight. And whoever can come, whoever interested in the topic can come. There's no agenda. It's open space, open community, open format. So you can just come join and say, I want to talk about, say, Uber. I want to talk about how we regulate online bullying and things like that. And there'll be people not only from citizens, not only from industries or academy, there'll be also people from the government as well to be there in a space, collaborate with you. So it's just quite a free form kind of style. What else? All the people there in a space, if you go to a hackathon, say every 2 months or 3 months, you see a totally entire group of people, because we kind of talk about different cases from time to time. Different week we'll probably just have discussion on different cases. So like sometimes we'll talk about how we want to organize the hackathon also. So some administrative stuff will be also discussed in the hackathon time and space. And okay, so how does that work? For the process, from beginning to the end, from starting an issue to really write a draft bill and send to the parliament. These are all the smaller steps kind of emerged after these 5 years. So every issue about the parts I think worth mentioning is that every issue launched on V-Taiwan's platform has to be committed from both the society side and also the government side. So there's no part that will be left out, and when only those parts have some commitments, that's when we can decide to go ahead and launch a case. And it has to be, another limitation is it has to be digital related topic also. So like on the building, on like healthcare, teaching remotely, or sharing intimate image on the internet, how do we regulate that? And that could be discussed on the platform. So from beginning to end, these are all the processes and all the tools we use to facilitate these processes. So you can see largely we use a lot of open source tools. So we use Discord, for example, as a forum to curate topics, discussions on top. And we also use another very awesome tool called Polis over here. It's made by Colin McGill in Seattle, and it's an open source tool empowered by AI to calculate consensus from society. So it's very handy to use from the beginning to get a sense of what people are thinking about just from the right start before we going too deep to think about what kind of categories to regulate. So, but that could be too complicated. So you can actually look at the process in 4 stages, from proposing an idea, creating the information, and to reflect stage, and all the way to legislation. The worth mentioning part is the reflection stage, because that's the place we kind of pour the discussion space from the internet to face-to-face. So in the opinion stage, actually, it's more on the internet, more online. But in the reflection stage, we kind of reach out to the people who are more active on the internet, and we ask them to come join the meeting. We call it consultation meeting, and there we'll have people around all stakeholders to talk about how we want to regulate. So why is it important? I think Taiwan is trying to experiment on this way of generating consensus among a large group, and it's not only particularly to Taiwan or to any government agency. It's actually a way to think about how people collaborate together and how we can gather consensus from a larger group of people. And it's also scalable because we use open source tools, and it's also quite adaptive to many places. So we've been sharing the idea to different countries, including we try experiment in New York also. We also try in Japan and also Hong Kong. Yes. Yeah. So maybe I'll skip this part, but just briefly talk about how it was built. Was out of a protest we had in 2014. It's called Sunflower Movement, when some students entered the parliament and occupied there for 22 days. And then we tried to conduct a deliberation inside the parliament, and it was quite successful. So then, in the end, the minister that time, one of the ministers that time, proposed to have a platform for more, she said, rational discussion. But then some city hackers in the community in Taiwan, we decided to build the platform and have it open to the public. So I think my time is up, and I'll skip some of the parts. But this concept of recursive public is from Kelty Christopher, talking about always having updated consensus, rough consensus from the community, and I think that's how we run with Taiwan. There are some cases we've done throughout the past 5 years, 26 in total. Regulations got changed, including regulating Uber and other fintech and other cases. There are still some difficulties, we can discuss about that also, but I'll take your questions. Thank you.
Some time for questions?
What have been some of your experiences about how to operationalize rough consensus in real time specifically, especially when you have people iterating off a live stream? What are some things that worked or things you learned?
Yeah, so to facilitate on and off, so we call it on-off space, on-offline space. So to facilitate that kind of space, we always, if there's anything that happened on the offline space, we will definitely do a live stream as thought. So everything is also recorded on the internet. And people on the internet can not only watch, but they can also comment and have their voice out through the chat channel. And when they comment things on the chat channel, the facilitator in a room, in a physical room, will just read them all out in front of people, go through all the comments. But we use some techniques, it's called ORID. I think you just, in that technique, you try to only read the comments that has fact inside, that's more talking about fact, numbers. If it's a kind of feeling like, oh, I really like what you're doing, or I really hate what you're doing, those are feelings, we don't read them. So we only read the facts, ignore the feelings. And then it's actually quite fast if you ignore all the feelings and only read the facts, and it's just quite simple and easy. in 2 minutes you can read like 2,000 comments. Yes.
How do you prevent the industries you're regulating from coming in and influencing this process too much?
Yeah, they're one of the stakeholders, so it's totally legitimate to have all the voices. So in the consultation meeting, there will be industries, there will be, so like in the case of regulating Uber, Uber's representative were also there, but also taxi associations representative, and also citizens who like Uber, who didn't like Uber, taxi drivers who want to advocate for their rights, they were also there. So I think it's totally fine to have people who want to advocate for their voices, and it's an art to facilitate. So it's more difficult to find a neutral facilitator in the center of the room.
Time for one more question.
I was just curious with that, reading out the facts and not the feelings live in the room. Over the few years you've been doing it, do you feel like that practice has changed how much people tend to comment with feelings or facts, like in the actual online text?
Yeah, so one of the cool things we found out also is by another twist we did is changing the interface. In the beginning, we kind of researched on a lot of online tools on how people discuss a general topic. We, in the end, decided to not choose any interface that has a reply button, because you know, when you can reply, you can build on the conversation and it can go all wrong. And also trolls can come in. So we use the tool called Polis because it doesn't have a reply button on top. Instead, they use algorithm, I guess you guys know PCA, to calculate what are the principal components in this conversation. And with that, people, the way how people interact with the interface is, instead of replying to the comments, they can actually rewrite how people think. So you can see the diagram when people try to come up with a more neutral and more constructive feedback, and then the conversations become more and more neutral. So in the case of Uber, it was like 4 different groups, quite obviously, but then we found out there were only 2 groups in the end, and I just want to share the video of this also.
We're at time, so I'm gonna ask maybe if you could follow up with the person to show the video.
Yeah,
just
sure. So if you want to come up to me, and we can talk about how Polis works also, and the way how we visualize different groups and discussion.
Great, thank you.
Sorry for that.
What's your name?
As
you're talking, tell us.
Yeah.
So then our next talk will be Dinesh on Ant Hill Hacks, a location-inclusive fair.
Thank you. Just a short link. Hi, my name is Dinesh, and like Popchi said, I'll say a few things about myself, where I come from, so it makes more sense to say why we're doing all this. How do you bring this on?
You just go ahead and give us.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
I need to
looking for a link, or you have a presentation?
No, I need to bring the screen on.
The screen's right there. You just want a full screen look?
No.
You want help them?
Are you able to maybe speak
No, it's
without?
fine. You just have to drag that.
Yeah, you want to use this one, right?
No. Oh, yeah. Okay.
There you go.
So, so I used to be in Palo Alto 20 years ago. Okay. If you can drag it, sorry, it's not my machine.
No problem.
And I went back to India and I had some ideas on how I could change the world. And after 10 years, during the first 10 years, I got involved with many local groups working on social issues and all that. And after that, what I say is, I couldn't get back to what I was doing at Go Forward. And basically what happened in those 10 years is to realize that there are about 5 billion people in the world who can't read and write. comfortably at least. And all of our work has been with the rest of them, like you and I. Even if we talk about accessibility, there is a basic assumption that they're at least as educated, reasonably educated. So the accessibility comes down to physical accessibility and not content accessibility. In the meantime, if you look at how we talk, how we engage, is hardly ever an accessibility problem. Who we engage with in a physical space, right? Just think about it. So content accessibility. So now, being techies, like instead of asking them to go get educated so that they're more like me, we need to look at like how technology can come to everywhere. So that's the starting point. And one thing that we started doing is an event like this DWeb Camp, but for 9 days. And everybody is invited. Villagers are invited. It's free. Techies, super techies, the urban space designers, artists, educationists, everybody is invited. And that's called the Anthill Hacks. And the first time we did it was in 2015. And they can do whatever they want, no subject, except please include the location you're at. You're coming here to this TMF, the mushroom farm. In what way have you included the location, either in your talk, or in your work, or while you're eating, or what you're sending a message, whatever. And our idea was to see, I come from an academic background, so our idea was to see what would be a proceedings that goes out after the conference for each one of them. Okay, so if you follow this Anthill Hacks, its short link is j.mp/myhill. You will see what we came out with is a 3D extruded open source map of that hill, where everything was annotated with tags, and if you click on a tag, it will take you briefly to what happened at that point. Right? You can walk around. See, that was one of the ways we saw what might be an outcome of the proceedings. So you go back now, you submit a lot of pictures, and there will be like the lightning room hashtag. So now you can look at what happened here. It could be a local language, a small village community which did a play. They would see, their community would see what happened and who engaged. You know, it's just an attempt that we did. Okay. So briefly, we have a small anthill hack going on behind the backstage where the music and the fire happen. Go enjoy and make something with your hand and use some local material from the farm. And the rules are there. I'm done.
So we have some time for questions, maybe one or two.
What's your next goal and what do you need and what?
Thank you. So again, like, you know, this is like super technology intensive thing because we're considering everybody. So we are open to like with 3D build a space. We want the next thing you'll see that, and every object, we had a drone coming in and capturing a building, and we do structure and what's it called? And we rebuild the 3D space and put it on the map, and people can walk in and see, oh, this is the meeting, these are the different things that happen. That's like really nice technology, right? And then you can also do cross links between, it's a decentralized space. You can do annotation and cross links, connect, interconnect, and whoever comes there is not asked like how they can find the information. It's what we call a spatial navigation. It's not a search word navigation. It's not so you do spatial navigation, you move around, it's like, this is where things happen.
Oh, in a physical space.
So that requires a lot of AI to 3D reconstruction, to space understanding, to you name it.
Do you have a link for that?
Yeah, it's all there. You can click and go forward.
Could you show us?
Yeah. I mean, it's j.mp for jump /myhill. MYHILL.
Just click on it right there, it's on the page.
I don't know if I have the editing rights.
Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, just move down to your right, move down with the little mouse. Yeah, I'll do it for you. This is the people really like to
It's
see.
view only. It's view only. That's right. Oh, yeah, the editing view. Very simple. j.mp/myhelp. Okay, yeah, that's a nice one, Robert. Thank you. Yeah, this is the poster, and if you zoom in, you'll see like, so you can see the anthill here. Anthill is the small thing that you just walk by most of the time without understanding the complexity, and every location is like that in our lives, right? But once you spend time, you'll see the complexity of the structure and what's going on, what the ants do, how they communicate, why they make, they even have schools in there. And childcare and all that. Okay, so just that idea.
Okay.
Yeah, we're done. I think. So thank you so much for the
round of applause. And so, can Molly come up to set up for our next talk?
I need USB-C.
Oh, perfect. It's already. All right. So I'll hand it over to Molly to tell us what's up with IPFS.
Hello everyone, I'm Molly. I'm the project lead for IPFS, and I'm excited to just give you a little bit of an update on what we've been working on the past couple of quarters and the 3 interesting challenges we're facing today and kind of how we're structuring ourselves to address them. So, I'm going to start with a little bit of a background. How many people in the room here are familiar with IPFS already? Okay, we're going to go really fast through this. You guys are probably pros. Cool. Really quick, what's the IPFS project? What brings us together? This is a community of over 4,000 contributors from around the world, huge presences in North America and Europe, and a growing presence in Asia as well. The key component of IPFS, which stands for the Interplanetary File System, is building this distributed storage network based on content addressing, which means you address data based on what the data is, not where it's located in the network or who is hosting it. My favorite analogy on this, which I'm shamelessly stealing from others who come before me, is when you're recommending a book to a friend. And instead of saying, hey, go to the New York Public Library on 14th Street and go to the 3rd floor and go to the 3rd shelf from the left, and the top shelf, there's a book, and you go 3 in from the right, that is the book that you should see. Go to that location, and then you figure out, oh crap, that's the book that's been in my backpack this entire time. Because you're addressing the book by where it's located, and then people have to go there in order to realize, hey, wait, I already had that content. This allows us to address content in a more distributed network, where instead of having to rely on central nodes to host that content and trust them to be the intermediator, we allow anyone to serve content based on what it is, and it lets us have a more distributed structure. So why does this matter? Content addressing lets us solve some pretty important problems that we're facing with the internet today. One particularly relevant one to us, we were in Barcelona 3 weeks ago for IPFS Camp, and in Catalonia, in the referendum in 2017, the president of Catalonia, former president of Catalonia, actually tweeted out a link to the IPFS gateway to try and get around the censorship that the Spanish government was placing around the locations of polling stations for this referendum. So it allows us to have a more flexible network and hopefully less blocking of the valuable content that we need. So what are we focused on this year? Our mission, which we spent some time actually writing down and documenting, it's on our GitHub page, is to make all information on the internet uniquely and permanently content addressed on a peer-to-peer web. And that kind of breaks down for us into a couple of main areas. I'm going to talk about these again in just a second, but this is our roadmap also up on GitHub. We've already ticked off one of them, but a lot of them are still work in progress. So what are these challenge areas? What's the interesting, exciting stuff that we're pushing on right now? As I said, showing you this again, this really breaks down into 3 separate areas. One is around package managers and production readiness. This is making sure that when you take large directories of data and you put them on IPFS, you have a wonderful performant experience and you get to experience the benefits of content addressing in that world. So there's a lot of challenges that package manager ecosystems face that we think IPFS can be a really good solution for. And so doing the homework to understand all of the pain points that they're experiencing and how we can go and fit those really effectively is one of those areas. The next is around network scalability. We didn't even realize how much that this goal was going to be important for us at the beginning of the year, but making this also is a component of leveling up production readiness and supporting all the people who are using IPFS today in larger and larger deployments and larger applications. And there's a big focus here around testing benchmarks and doing the optimizations needed to make sure those run really effectively. And finally, community support. We just met with our entire community, a subset of the IPFS community in Barcelona for IPFS Camp, which was super awesome. But we also realized a ton of people came out of the woodwork who we'd never met before. And we can't do a great job supporting each other as a community if we don't even know who we are. And so there's a lot of work that was uncovered through that, where we can be doing even a better job communicating, collaborating, supporting each other, and leveling us all up on the core concepts in IPFS. So let's dive a little bit into each of those because they're kind of interesting and meaty. The first one is package managers, and there's been a ton of research in this space. We've effectively spent most of Q1 and Q2 really diving deep on what it looks like to put package managers on IPFS, doing targeted performance assessments, and focusing in the coming quarters on doing even more of this work. So we built actually a number of proof of concepts. NPM on IPFS is one of them. Has some really cool stuff, but also still was centralized in some ways we thought we could do even better. Some cool stuff on mirroring APT, and so there's some really cool stuff in there, like deduplication factors, but still pretty resource intensive. Then we kind of realized, oh man, the IPFS network is scaling out of, you can't really choose when you hit scale. It just kind of comes at you and you have to keep up with it. So, looking away from package managers, there's a huge chunk of our time here, which is supporting all of the nodes that are joining the IPFS network, which was 30x last quarter, which is huge and unprecedented for our growth. And this kind of uncovered a lot of areas around gateway performance and public infrastructure. How do we support all of these nodes? 30x in a network is something that definitely requires changes, uncovers new issues. And so optimizing an end-to-end network throughput and making sure our gateways are really responsive is a huge challenge that comes out of that and something we're super focused on this quarter. And finally, we had a lot of new apps that were released in the last bit of the quarter. There's a lot of cool new data. I'm going really fast because more time. From IPFS Camp, how do we get this out to our community? How do we support all of these apps that are building on top of IPFS so that they can be doing great things for their millions of users and empowering all of them with the documentation and community support to have a really great time. Protoschool is a component of this as well, but there's a lot more that we're going to be doing around that to make it even better and easier to use. Thank you.
So we have time for a few questions.
What are the things that have driven the 30x adoption? Is it just a lot more people choosing it as a way to find and your network, best way to say is route or access?
Yeah. So we don't have any sort of privileged telemetry over the IPFS network. So all of this is just a node looking at kind of the peer IDs, the hash peer IDs it connects to, and getting a sense of how many different peer IDs it sees within a 24-hour window, and then we throw all that information away again and do the next one.
Why? What do you think?
Yeah, why is it growing? We have two hypotheses, because again, we can't know, distributed network. One of them is we released a feature called Auto Relay around the same time, which is trying to help people who are hidden behind NATs connect to each other and relay their traffic through some more central nodes, which means we have more nodes who are going over the same pathways. So maybe we're seeding more nodes. So the network was always that big, but they're just now more connected to each other and we're able to see them. The other hypothesis is there have been new launches, new like desktop apps embedding Go IPFS nodes and joining the DHT, which have driven that sort of scale. And again, we don't know what app that might be. So if anyone does hear of anyone who launched large apps in Q2, let us know, because that'd be super cool.
Any technology lifts, things you need help with?
Yeah, so definitely the documentation side is something where people are already getting involved throughout the community to like let us know where we should be prioritizing our time. I've helped us with this in the past as well. And so that's definitely an area of help. People who are building proof of concept package managers, we've done a number ourselves, but there are more people, like I was hearing someone who's building, putting cargo on IPFS. Like we want to hear about that and understand what went well, what were the pain points, how do we go and make that even better, because that's our core goal for the year. And then finally, we don't want to be the only people running IPFS gateways. We want everyone to be empowered to run that so that we're not like shuttling all of our traffic through kind of central infrastructure. So we have some efforts to make that easier for other people to run so we can have a whole community of gateways.
Is it open to anyone to contribute?
Yeah, fully open source.
So one more question.
Can you talk about any of the specific design decisions you've made to support package managers on IPFS?
Yeah, so this is not a design decision we've made yet, but something we've been recognizing is pretty painful, which is around using MFS and how to do rapid updating of directories. So kind of the way IPFS works under the hood, and it is really important, it works this way, is that everything's content addressed, which means you can see which things, like if something has changed, its hash has changed, and so you kind of have that verifiability built into things. But at the same time, you know, when you're trying to do rapid updates of something like NPM, which is huge and changing all the time, support for very large directories or many files are both really important, and you need to do it in a performant way so that you're just updating the things that have changed and not kind of all of the intermediary nodes. And so there's literally ongoing design discussions about that area, about how we can do that better and make it more efficient for these really large sets of data, which conveniently don't just benefit package managers, but all sorts of large data on top of IPFS. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys.
And now we'll have Mark talking about scaling decentralization, 2 million plus monthly users on the Gun protocol.
Woo! Hello world, I'm Mark Nadal, and I actually am really happy because just 4 days ago, the number went up from 2 to 15 million because a independent tech blog called Hacker Noon wound up adopting Gun, and they did the deployment 4 days ago, and I had just gotten a bunch of stats up for weeks to start tracking the network size, and I got to see all the numbers go skyrocketing, and I'm fairly happy with going from the 2 to 15 million. There's certainly some bottlenecks now at this layer. I'm now going to spend the next 6 months, year working at, but the fact that that transition itself was smoother than I was hoping made me very, very happy. So, and then the mesh network stuff here was happening, so it's been a crazy week and pretty exciting. So I want to talk about scalability because to me it's the elephant in the room, which is decentralization originally kind of got started with this idea of immutability. Immutability is good, but it's difficult to scale up, and I'm going to give a concrete example of that. Let's say we want a decentralized version of Uber. That Uber driver is going to be updating their GPS coordinates hundreds of times per second as we're trying to talk to them. And we can form a direct link between them with WebRTC, UDP, or other things, but realistically it's going to be WebRTC on your phone in the browser. And if you are changing the way you find the data hundreds of times a second, you then have to perform that lookup another hundreds of times a second to figure out where the new data is versus that data being able to update in place. Now it's also possible to do that with cryptography. We have a whole library for that called C, which wraps web crypto in the browser, but that's not for this talk. I can expand on it later. So that's just the touching point on mutability, why it's important for scaling and it having actually worked in production on a large network just a few days ago as well as the months before. So now switching to like, okay, well, what is scalability now beyond the technological layer that seems to be maybe starting to work? Like maybe it's starting to work, okay, what's next? And it's somewhat of a tautology, but we want more people to be on the network such that more people can benefit from hopefully the values that we hold of privacy and decentralization. But honestly, not a lot of people are necessarily going to make a change based off of having a more private system. I wish they would. But we can kind of add our values of privacy and decentralization by also moving into the physical sphere. And that is literally what this camp is about. So Gun is also running the exact same code as that network with 15 million people in it here offline. Well, we do actually have internet, but offline on this mesh network of actual radios and cables being strung. If you go to 10.8.8.8, which is the directory listing, you can check out the schedule out. It's pretty ugly. It's 50 lines of code. But the point is, it works. You can mutate the schedule. Apparently, I got in trouble for saying shower coordination. But if you have a pop-up talk, you can put it on. And if you wind up moving, you can change the data. And that works here locally offline and connects as fast as the network. I brought 9 Raspberry Pis to run for each radio. But then they did a cool thing where they let the radios talk. They let the Raspberry Pis talk to each other through an IP layer. So technically this mesh network is operating more like the internet, but whether it's beneath that at a mesh network in a broadcast mode or in an IP mode or in across, from London to SF, because people who are on HackerNoon are not in one community. So the same algorithms work across the board and have very nice, rich scalability features. And I can get into the technical details in a breakout session if you guys want. 5 minutes. It really is the mutable component, but how it actually works, happy to talk about later. So once we're now at this layer of, okay, we're starting to get inclusivity by physically bringing people internet, hopefully over time. That is gonna take time to roll out hardware, but it's important. We need to go that direction. But what are then people going to use the internet for? Streaming Netflix from US East 1, Amazon servers, to get Facebook data. I think that's fine. If they want to choose to do that, they can. But ideally, that those apps would work in the decentralized network. They do, but how do we then incentivize people off of those platforms? I'm just going to then end on my company as a whole. It's called Era, and I've kind of pivoted from focusing on the technological layer. We're still doing that, but I feel comfortable with where we're at. We're going to keep on working hard at that. But now start asking these social questions. How do we get physical internet to people? How do we take these routers and give them to people for free so that way they can get their communities connected? And once we get their communities connected and all the people who are privileged enough to have internet, how do we get them to cooperate in a pro-social game? A lot of people are saying blockchain is the solution for this. And I'm going to make the controversial statement that Bitcoin and most blockchain systems are running off the same win-lose mentality of capitalism, socialism, choose whatever camp you're on. It is fundamentally, I give you Bitcoin or cash, you gain it, I lose it. But hey, open source has worked, okay, for decades now. And open source is a gift economy. Both people win. I give it to you, I give it to HackerNoon, I give it to the other communities running D2, which is a decentralized version of YouTube, Not a Bug, which is a peer-to-peer version of Reddit. And the more I give it out, and the more people that use it, that to me is the metric that matters. That's the value that I get, but the value that they get is free software that works at scale, that has ideologies of privacy and decentralization built into it, and is win-win for the community. So ultimately, I hope we can form a currency around the gift economy and open source. So if you're interested in that, come talk to me later. Thanks.
So we have a couple minutes for questions or comments.
No one else? No one else? I think you're underrating. Oh, wait.
I want to know what HackerNoon is doing with 13 million clients, like why did they add that to their site?
So they moved off of Medium.com, and the integration point for me was Medium had a annotation system, and in their new HackerNoon 2.0, which is their own custom software, I said, hey, there's a non-critical system, which is annotations. Why don't I slap it in? I spent like 2 hours one night and like a month ago, and then over the last month, we were like, okay, how do we make sure it's in the final product when polishing needs to be done? So annotations is the specific feature. So every single browser that is then loading any article on HackerNoon is then becoming part of the decentralized network. And I can talk about how WebDC is successful some of the time, fails some of the time, but ultimately you run through a decentralized relay, a decentralized network of relay peers. So that way you can still guarantee throughput of data if WebDC fails.
Yeah, I think you're actually underrating the value. I think it's not just a GIF economy. GIF economies are good, potlatches. You've actually built a synergistic value add platform, which is fundamentally more valuable. Because gift is, I give you this, but I still don't have it right now. This is 5x times 10x times 20 without it costing anyone less. If anything, the value of the thing I gave you goes up because of what you added back, like you just talked about annotation. So it's actually fundamentally more valuable.
Yes. Yeah. The issue is, for people who understand it, it's mind-blowing. But the success of the economic model should be measured by how many people end up using it, regardless of whether they understand the model. So capitalism and socialism, very successful at that. Bitcoin was very successful at getting people excited about it, but ultimately people have to understand it.
It's an incremental capitalism,
right?
It's a synergistic
so
capitalism.
The synergistic system, right? The people who understand it's like, yes,
it's a force multiplier.
It's still, yes, but it still works for everybody else who cares or doesn't care. So
I think that's time.
all right, thanks so much.
Ludovic here? Am I pronouncing their name right? Ludovic? Write smart contract with clarity. Who are you?
I'm a Vic, and I'm up in you.
Okay, do you mind if you come up now?
Yeah.
Slight rejig of the talk schedule.
Might as well.
So we have, I guess, a little more time if you want.
Okay.
I'm gonna go outside and see if I can sort out. Do you need you can do HDMI drive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me plug this in and see what happens. Oh, exciting. I'll keep it easy. What is that? A bit, yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so join me in welcoming Abik talking about Sovereign Centaur, wearable tech, and the D-Web.
Awesome. Hi, friends. Woo! So I'm going to say a bunch of things that you guys probably already know, and then hopefully shine some lights on some things that you also already know, but might not have thought about as much. So my name's Abik. My project's called Sovereign Centaur, and the idea is that we're all centaurs. We're human in some parts and digital in others, and our digital parts are very much a part of ourselves, and they're very important. We care about them, hence we're all here to take care of these digital extensions of ourselves. But right now we're not sovereign, so many of these digital aspects of ourselves are governed by value systems that aren't our own. So it's sort of like if Google owned your ability to walk or Facebook owned your ability to communicate with friends that you met at a conference. Oh wait, it does. And all of these different systems are misaligned, despite being very important parts of yourself. So hence, we need the decentralized web. I think you guys also all know that, where realigning these values is highly, highly important for the ongoing technological relationship that humans have with their devices. And so in order to accelerate adoption, I am on the search for, let's say, like a killer app, something that is so useful that it basically makes the question of do you adopt it or not a non-question. Like you have to do it because to continually engage in society. Things like Google search, email, Facebook, things that provide so much value that you have to take whatever hurdles in order to adopt that kind of system. But any killer app should be optimized for the things that DWeb provides and not be able to be implemented in a centralized aspect in order to keep it from being not just a new useful thing that can be implemented in a Web 2.0 kind of structure. And so any kind of application, like what is the DWeb really good at? And breaking that down being extremely high bandwidth, less hops over the network. I thought I saw some IPFS folks in the back earlier. And highly private, so ownership models that are person-centered, you-centered as opposed to outside entity-centered. And distributed resource allocation. So again, storage with the IPFS folk, but also potentially computes and processing where your storage, your computes can be aligned with yourselves instead of being handled by an institution that again isn't yourself. And I'm of the perspective that wearable technology needs all of those things in spades, where we need highly private data. That in the top right-hand corner, it was also kind of glorified LifeLogger. It generated data faster than I could reasonably send over the internet. So even if it's cheaper to store on S3 or they have more cloud computing power, you can't really get gigabytes of data a second off of it. So high bandwidth, high storage needs, and highly private data. We already see with employers tracking your Apple Watch data to see if you're healthy, for insurance, to truckers being tracked with GPS for employment enforcement. If these sort of ubiquitous sensor technologies are governed by values that aren't the person themselves, it easily leads to Black Mirror kind of situations. So I would argue that this, in the wearable technology space, it also has the capacity to be extraordinarily useful. So looking at right now Google, which is trying to get a 360-degree view, they're pretty much the closest at being able to say, hey, I know your calendar, I know your location, I know all of these physical aspects about you, and then they can start making sensor fusion algorithms to bring together these different data streams in extremely useful ways. Oh, you need to leave by this time to get to your meeting at this time, all of these things that I know. So, but in a wearable technology kind of situation where it knows everything about you all the time, then you could make extremely useful applications, bring those sensor data streams together, and I would envision a world in which smart assistants, music players and the sort would, instead of being able to have to like non-consensually take this data from you, they could just ask and say like, hey, what do you want to listen to? And then your system within yourself would be able to tell them, knowing your personality or your mood or whatever, the best value add to you, and it being kind of symbiotic. So how to get there, and this is where all of you guys come in, because luckily there are people much smarter than me working on the actual hard technical problems of like, okay, how do we do distributed data stores? How do we build decentralized applications? How do we build decentralized value structures and decentralized economic models and have systems that can be actually implemented on the technology that we have and make it scalable. And so my part, where I'm hoping to fit in, is on prototyping these potentially highly useful applications in a non-scalable way. So I have my handbag here, the insides of it's up there. I have all of my wearable devices around. These are tracking like all of my joint positions for activity classification. You can get breathing rate, all of these things, and starting to ideate around these data streams, ways to process on that in highly useful ways, and hopefully developing applications that can only run on the DWeb such that it can sort of accelerate its development upon being proved useful. And thank you. And if you would like to talk offline about any of these topics, whether it's decentralized oracles, secure execution environments, dynamic provisioning and consent system, all of these I feel are very necessary for building the future internet so that we can all build that kind of system that we were talking about, where our digital aspects of ourselves are governed by our own values. Thanks.
So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions if they're quick.
Yes.
So I love the enthusiasm. I just want to point out IPFS and DAT are not private.
Oh yeah.
Like they're the least private types of systems you can use, and that's not a knock against them
Inherent.
because WebTorrent has the same problem. That's what I work
Uh-huh.
on. Basically, you know, whenever you're accessing information, everybody in the world can see that you're doing that DHT lookup. So I don't know.
Inherently,
Something to
no,
think
I
about.
think that there's exciting projects like PureGOS to handle one level of encryption. And of course, all of these are technical problems of which smarter people than I can solve. And hence saying, as I am sort of doing these prototyping, I think that you are very aware of all the shortcomings of all existing implementations and will fight to solve those in a way where hopefully we can meet up.
You're pretty smart.
Aw, shucks.
Final
Thanks.
question?
Yeah, like with regard to decentralized secure compute markets, like have you seen like other than wanting that, what projects have you found promise in?
See, there used to be a company called Computes, also my hometown's in Arizona, and they just recently got acquired by Magic Leap, but they were super excited where it's like, oh, the IPFS folk are kind of like S3, and then we'd be kind of like the EC2 of like providing decentralized markets for compute. So I imagine that these highly useful applications that are computing on your data need to be owned by you. And so saying in a market kind of situation, oh yeah, no, I don't have my own computes, but I can just like spin up I can just buy GPU time in a very convenient way to train my models and then help me. But I know it's not out there right now, is what I'm saying. Yeah. If any of you guys would like to work on that, love it.
Okay, please join me in thanking
Letting me reschedule you.
Oh, good.
And we have a late entrant, who I think they're not in the room right now, but are just in the other room. Rich Burden.
John Kunze is here. Should be on your list, so if he's not here.
I was in the room, I've never seen him before, so I was trying to follow over what it
Oh,
said.
we got it. Okay.
Yeah, so first time I've heard of him.
We'll do this one and then I will come and find you right now. Okay, so Rich Burden on.
Just need a second.
and
Just need a second to set
For
up.
peer-to-peer collaborative apps. Second.
Okay. Thank you.
Chris, switch that with them. He was
Oh, Gordon.
I use Messenger.
Okay. Just let me know and I'll wrap it up. I'll go as quickly as I can.
1 minute warning.
Yeah.
And then sort of a
Okay.
space.
For some reason, it's
Can I make a suggestion? Do you think we can overlap the setup of the next speaker with the question period of the previous speaker so that we can have more question time and less wasted time?
Sure.
Thank you, that's worked out.
What's wrong with your because I'm definitely.
Can I connect? Yeah, you can connect.
It's fine, gotcha.
Yeah.
Their search actually works well for messaging.
Well, there you are.
Wow, we have a friend. They'll have to add projector.
Yeah, it might be a secondary display.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well,
Move it over, or I think you might have a thing to pop up for you to change it. Okay, that sounds great. I think it's, yeah, it's coming up. That's the right way. Keep going. Yeah.
Steve had the same problem. If you want to have a team.
I can't move it. My machine's frozen.
No, it's moving. Your cursor's moving.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can I say welcome?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so please join me in welcoming Rich.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. So we've got 10 minutes. We're going to race through some slides. I work on a project called Wireline. We're building a framework for peer-to-peer applications. peer-to-peer collaborative applications. So we're all excuse me, guys. Sorry. We're all working towards the same goals, I think, here. You know, these are the bad guys. And the current software industry is focused on venture-backed applications. And so we end up with thousands and thousands of apps that don't work together, that are built by venture companies where the developers are not aligned with our interests as users. This is what we really want. Intelligent applications that work for us, that not instead of juggling between hundreds of different apps, single intelligent systems that work on our behalf. But this is where we're heading. So we've got these super intelligent systems that are owned by corporate interests that don't do what we want, and they're also closed systems that we can't extend. So we need to fix the web. We're all working on fixing the web, owning and creating your own identity, data privacy, prevention of censorship, all these things that we care a lot about. But in general, people don't care about this. I mean, people are getting more and more interested in it, and they won't really care until we can build apps that are better than the apps that we have today. But software is really difficult. We've got lots of tools, we've got lots of libraries, we've got NPM, lots of different open source software, and as developers, it's very easy for us to build prototypes, but shipping production software is really difficult and requires venture financing usually. That's the dominant model. Creating production quality peer-to-peer software is even more difficult. Handling identity, authorization, enabling anonymity in some cases, dealing with occasionally connected or partitioned networks, managing data consistency when you've got many peers interacting in single application, and then in many situations trying to make it Byzantine fault tolerant because you have malicious actors. So all of this is very, very difficult, but a lot of these components or problems are shared across many different applications, so we might be able to solve it in a common way. And that's what we're trying to do at Wireline. So we've got an app here we're going to demo in the next 5 minutes. I was actually presenting these slides from the Wireline Launchpad. It's a collaborative editor. And if I click on the home key here, these are the apps that we've started to prototype with. So we've created the core technology for Wireline. It's called Megafeed. It's a lightweight virtual database that is made up from many constituent feeds that are actually using the DAT protocol. So we've created DAT extensions to enable a logically consistent lightweight database that we call a party, and you can be members of multiple parties at the same time. Within this party here, I've got a document called WebCamp, which is the text document here that I can put into view mode or split mode. We'll demo that a bit more in a minute. And I can create a new document here. So it's called this demo, and start typing. I can't see my screen, so I'll turn around here. Hello, WebCamp. I was leaning on the keyboard there. So in order to collaborate, I'm going to create a link here. It's a one-time party invitation, and I'm going to send that to Chris, who's sitting over here. We're using the WebCamp Wi-Fi, but we've also got a gadget that we'll show in a minute that makes it possible to create ad hoc networks. And now I see that I've got one peer that's joined. If I open up the debug panel here, I can see that I'm now connected to Ancient Puma 65. I'm Unlucky Husky 9. So these are the auto-generated IDs for the credentials we just set up. And there's Chris. So I can be typing at the same time as you. Are you there, Chris?
Yes, I am. Okay,
so when I say I should be typing at the same time,
I am.
Okay. So as you see, as I'm typing, you can see some network activity here on the DAT feeds. Is it working for you, Chris?
I think the DWeb network just disconnected me, which is it's a fair game at a camp like this, and we can switch to our backup thing.
I'll move on while you're doing that. You're going to try and reconnect, right?
Yes, I am doing this right now.
Okay, so I see that Chris has left the swarm. Just to show what was happening here, what should be happening, we've got the ID here of the party, which is the shared virtual database. And in this case, because we had two peers, there's two feeds that joined the party.
So obviously each feed had 1 minute. Okay. Many different, and that's to the question and answers, right? So many kinds of apps. We built a chess app to show how simple it is to build an app. The document editor is using a complex CRDT that keeps a graph of the mutations so that you can have multiple people editing at the same time. Chess is much more simple. It's just a log-based CRDT. And these apps typically take about a day to build. So the day Google Calendar went down, we went to NPM, found a calendar control, and fitted that into the database. And I'll do just one or two more. We've got a chat application here. And I can say, hey, Chris, do you want to play a game? And if I hit that, there's a reference now into the actual chess game, and we can start playing within the scope of this party. And if Chris was actually connected, we'd be able to start collaborating. So let's see. The idea here is that anyone can publish applications on this framework. The metadata for the apps get published to a blockchain, which is a common registry for all of these applications. And then the apps themselves are downloaded from the DApp network or the Scuttlebutt network. It's something we're working on for later. We're out of time for the demo. Let's see if you can connect, and I'll answer some questions.
I switched to the backup network wireline demo. If you can join it too from your laptop, we're going to be golden.
Okay, so I'll just do that in the background, and then.
But we'll also be at the lounge for like the next hour, or maybe we can wait here, or we'll be at the lounge.
This is
we're
on
pretty
our.
easy to spot. We're wearing wireline t-shirts.
Okay. Question in the back. Hi.
Yeah. So the database that's in the browser, how do you query it? And then also, if you needed to do a data migration, how do you sort of think about that?
Okay, so the database in the browser. The database is made up of at least one DApp feed, append-only signed and encrypted feed for each participant. And as a user, I might have multiple devices, and so each of those devices would have its own write-only feed. Once you connect to the swarm, you use the discovery key of the party, the public key of the party, to notify your intention to collaborate with other peers. Once you find another peer, there's a key exchange protocol that's an extension to the DApp, which will allow you to find the other public keys of the other constituent feeds. At that point, you start replicating all of those feeds, and you get all of the mutations now in a kind of random order. So then it's the next layer up that starts to stitch together those orders based on simple things like Lamport clocks that have tie-ins of the different mutations in different causal order. So you can create a total order, at least a unified partial order across all of the feeds. So now you've got a logically consistent set of protocol buffer messages that are typed for each of the different applications. So each app defines a set of protocol types that it's interested in consuming. And so now each app that lives inside the party can create a subscription to particular messages in order to consume them. And each app is a state machine that's able to manage that state.
Yes, there's an event stream that updates the state.
That's right. And apps are able to subscribe to messages from other apps. So you can have these collaborative moments. I'll just show what that looks like really quickly. So if I create a map here, and I go into, I add a few places in here, I can create a document now, and inside this document, here's hello, and I can say now I want to embed chess game, and so inside the document, I've got a live document with another application inside. So now both of these apps are living in the same party, and I can go and quickly let's embed the calendar that we created. That's called King, random names, and the map, which is Louisiana something, right? So here we've got, like, this could be an app builder or a custom app that's consuming data of different types from the same feed. These are live. Let's do that. So the second part of your question was migration. They're protocol buffers, and you can export. We've actually got a feature here where we can export the entire state of the party to an IPFS node or a DAT file.
Okay.
And then you can reread them as protocol buffer messages. Okay.
On that question.
All right.
Is Mix in the room? Okay, you can take more.
Okay.
questions.
Yeah. Anybody? Yes.
Did I get correctly that these are all multi-party, you use party in a different way, but
Yeah.
multi-party communications, collaborations, and that there's dynamic control over who is in the party?
That's right. So you send an invite, but in order for the invite to be honored, you have to write a signed credential onto your feed, an attestation, similar to verifiable credentials.
And you can revoke also?
And you can revoke them too, and the credentials can time out too. So you can have explicit revocation, but if you're in a petition network, the revocation might not propagate to you. So there's also a timeout, so that each of the peers can guard the party. And then there are the system level credentials. Are you allowed in? Are you allowed to write? Are you allowed to invite other people? And then there are application level credentials, such as, are you playing black or white? Because you might have 10 people in the party, but only 2 have the credentials for this state machine.
And is there privacy of the parties from each other in terms of location or IP addresses or?
The parties are disjoint and they have their separate credential management, so separate access control. Within the party, you do have the same system credentials. So you either have read or write or invite access.
Yeah, but do I know the IP address of the counterparty?
You probably know the IP address of your peer, but it depends on your network transport.
Okay, so it's all peer-to-peer.
It's all peer-to-peer. I mean, with the DAT protocol, we're using Discovery Swarm WebRTC, so that requires a signaling server for it to work in the browser, but it can degrade to other transports or upgrade to other transports.
There's a bit of time before the next talk is supposed to start, so we'll have
Last one.
Yeah.
As I understand from the presentation, the point of this, primary goal of this project is to solve a number of hard problems around this in this space.
Yeah.
So that other people can use this underlying tech to build a killer app on in the future,
Right.
so to speak. What are the next steps for this project, and what else do you need to solve?
Yeah, stability first. I mean, this is one of the first times we've shown this platform. So looking for feedback from infrastructure developers like yourself probably, and people at this kind of conference, so that we can refine the protocol level APIs. And then we'll be setting up a fund to enable people to build, to pay open source developers to build the first, say, 50 of these applications. And then it's all open source, then that will seed the network, and then people can come in and build their own applications, and end users can come in and use them.
Great.
Thanks very much. Okay, thanks everyone.
So we have a little bit of time before our next speaker. You can get up and stretch. Come sit back down immediately. And we'll start right at 12:10. So in 3 minutes, basically. It's a short stretch.
So I was just gonna say the name of your talk and your name.
Mhm.
It's Mix Irving.
Yeah, just Mix is fine.
Mix, okay.
for Q&A, but it can
Might be
it's a bit
flexi.
longer.
It might be on the short side. I'm not quite sure yet. I haven't practiced.
That's fine. I'll show you a thing, like I have a little book that says when there's 1 minute left, just for a cue, but I'm not like cutting people off.
Work.
Okay, I'm gonna start. I start at 12:10. So please join me in welcoming Mix talking about DWeb plus colonialization.
Hello, my name is Mix. I am from New Zealand. I work on the Scuttlebutt project. I've recently been, so I was also involved with DWeb Camp, working on some, making this event more accessible, helping channel some scholarship money towards people who might not have otherwise been able to be here. And that's been a real learning journey. Sort of that, among that and some other conversations sort of prompted me to learn a bit more about colonization. I'm in a country, New Zealand was colonized by the British, and yeah, and that affects who is able to participate in the space, which I've been interested in. And this talk is a little bit about how what we're making might also be influenced by colonization. So I'm fairly new to this topic. I'm a beginner. I haven't written or spoken about this before, so there's a lot of questions, and yeah, come on the journey with me. Yeah, so there's two things I want to, two ideas I want to introduce. One of them is what I'm super fond of. It's called The Medium is the Message. It's, there's an idea coined, or a phrase coined by a Marshall McLuhan, a media theorist. And then I want to talk about colonization and how those two things interact a bit. So the medium is the message. Is a shorthand for saying, well, like my understanding of it is, the shape of our systems and our protocols prefigure or determine what they say. Not like the literal text on the page, but the effect in society and the sort of society we have and how we interact. Examples that I've enjoyed, like to try and get my head around that concept, are the printing press, or like written word. And with the advent of the printing press, anyone could print anything. And that radically changed society, made it possible for different versions of the Bible to be printed, for example. Made it possible for accessible versions of the Bible to be printed, which probably had a large role in how the church has evolved, for example, which has influenced society. So the medium isn't what was written in that book, it was the fact, those printed books, it was the shape of the communication chain had this sort of opened up this possibility space. Okay, yeah, so some other examples. I was talking to someone yesterday, the day before, about Wikipedia, and they were telling me about how, on Wikipedia, knowledge is referenced. You have to, if I put something out, I have to cite a book or an article that was written, and that totally makes sense, because otherwise people could just make stuff up, right? But the problem that they were facing was that it doesn't really suit oral histories. There are histories and truths that have been preserved by people and are referenced by many people, but it's in spoken form. And so, in this context, Wikipedia does a great job for a certain sort of knowledge and totally excludes other sorts of knowledge. So the story that we're telling with Wikipedia and the knowledge that is being spread is of a particular shape. The message is being shaped by the medium. Similarly in science, was talking to a friend, I had a bad cold a month ago, and a friend in South Africa was recommending that I eat a bunch of mushrooms, like have some shiitake. They have like great antiviral properties. We got into a conversation. I was like, oh, he said also some of these mushrooms have like anti-cancer properties, and I was like, oh, okay, woof. That's got my like science hackles up. How do we know that's true? And we got into this great conversation about how some of the antiviral properties of mushrooms were like known by indigenous people, and wow, that went quick. Yep, known by so science. So I'll skip ahead a little bit. Science is set up to only know things which are measurable, and if science doesn't know what to measure yet or how to measure it yet, then it's not knowable by science, and that's fine. It's just as long as we don't mistake the truth of science for capital T truth. I'm going to skip identity, but states, just to say that states define identity by like passports, and that's, yeah, I don't want to go into it too much. So these are like new terms to me a little bit. Ontology and epistemology, these are like, people have, they're to do with the, how do you know what exists in the world? What, how do we define what is? Like, for example, identity, like, what is identity? How would we know it? And how would different people know what identity means? Epistemology, similarly, who gets to think sort of like, who gets to define knowledge, or like how is knowledge created? So tying these towards sort of DWeb and technology, we're building systems of knowledge creation and building in assumptions about what exists, and bridging this to also like to colonization. That's fine. Yeah, so it's really tempting to sometimes when you come to a new space to presume that your way of knowing and your way of knowledge creation is the best way, and it's what you're super familiar with. And if you don't ask to like just roll that out onto people, so I think like science and people in the West, science and technology are like really really in a bit of a rut. Like many people see science as a capital T truth, and it's actually challenging or scary to consider that there could be things that are not known by science, and that if it's not knowable by science, that it's not true. Done. So
Wait, you have time for questions?
yeah, sure. So I guess that's the challenge that I'm bringing to the peer-to-peer web is, how do we know whether this is new territory? I don't think peer-to-peer is actually that new. When I try to describe it to people, it actually sounds a lot like human systems and society and communication and trust, and identity being intersubjective and interpersonal. None of these things are particularly new, and to pretend that they might be new and that could be a story we're telling ourselves, how would we check that? What is the message that we want to be telling, and how are we careful that we're not blind to and overwriting other messages and other like truths? I'll leave it there. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions, but also could the next speaker talk on Puma Browser identify themselves to me, and then I'll hand it back to questions for next.
Kira.
You had this like really brief thing on one of the slides that said colonization, aka control of the medium.
Oh yeah, so
can you just briefly like expand on that?
Yep. So like people like in the context of people arriving in New Zealand, they arrived with conceptions of land and ownership, which was quite different to the conceptions of land and ownership that was known by and true to the Māori of New Zealand. And in order to make sense of New Zealand, people in the way that worked for them, and to gain control and a foothold within on which to build, it would be important for a colonizing force to have control of the definition of what truth is, and so that you can then say, well, here's the boundary. I traded it. It's mine. It's individually owned as opposed to collectively owned. Stuff like that. If that makes sense.
In this case, the medium is the land.
No, I guess the medium would be the acknowledgement and knowledge of what is true about like, so by putting in legislation and assuming that planting a flag equals ownership, then you can from there shape what the truth of a place is and shape the people and say like, you need to move because I'm now here.
Specifically the land title.
Yeah.
So it's actually one of the major things when we look at the overall what you're saying. There is no one objective truth that I impose. There's always an unspoken power dynamic in that. So there is a subjective points that we need to calculate and quantify our contrast. So it's really a profound point. I think it's why you see unmeasured. The other point you made about science and not being able to objectively measure something, that's because the assumption is that science's point of view literally is the point of view. That's why it can't. Because if it can't define it, it's not going to listen to other definitions.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, like you said, about health. And that's really the reason why things like Google search is breaking. Because they can't conceive, like it said in the nature, of any other model besides their own. And that's why their system stay out 7 days.
So someone has one final question for Nix. They can do it now, and then we're just going to have the next speaker come up. And just to let you know that the Puma talk is not here, so a slight tuck of the schedule.
Oh, sorry, I'm late for them here.
Oh, okay, never mind.
You want to film myself?
Come plug in.
Come plug in.
Yeah, down the back.
I'm curious how perspectives and concerns have shaped
HDMI, the old classic one. Let me make sure my pad is on the screen first.
I think it's like starting to shape. I think certainly like a plurality of truths that I can have multiple names. And that it's up to people to listen and choose who they listen to about the definition of my name and my identity. For people to determine, like leaving that wiggle room helps support some of us.
And there's no way to screen to mirror the
Yeah, I think I'm like personally I'm at the start of I'm just trying to
don't worry about it. I got it.
listen and talk to people about
Let me try this.
more indigenous people. For example, understanding how knowledge is passed, and that learning that some knowledge should be public, and that some knowledge is actually necessarily private. And yeah, that's a new idea to me, that not everything should be known to everyone, and that it's important to build that for us to be, and there are good reasons, and if we don't know them, then we wouldn't build that.
Role-based security and also sovereign identity that's subjective, or that's granted sovereign. Yep. Yeah. Maybe even role-based sovereign identity.
Yeah. And also like knowing where tribal burial sites are, but not wanting to tell people so that it doesn't become a tourist location, so zero knowledge proofs might be Thank you very much.
So our next talk is from Uri, Puma Browser, building a privacy-focused browser powered by Coil and Interledger. Please join me in welcoming Uri.
Hi folks. Hey. 1 second, sorry, let me update the screen resolution real quick. All right, you guys are all in the back there. Do you want to come closer? Or and the light is shining straight from the windows. I can see your faces, which is perfect. Oh, can't see anything. Great. Let's see. All right. 1 second. Sorry about that. Sorry. Yay, everything works. Cool. So, Puma Browser, how many of you were yesterday here for the lightning talks that Feroz and Dietrich from Protocol Labs or Mozilla were giving? We have 3 hands, 2.5 hands, 4 hands. Excellent. So I'll probably start from scratch then. We don't have too much time, but basically, my view on why am I building Puma Browser and what is Puma Browser? So last year I started exploring a lot of projects in crypto, and one of the problems that there is that everybody's building their own silo and everybody's very focused on their own coin, and there's very little work is being done to sort of bring the communities together. And I started exploring different projects, and I found this beautiful project called Interledger. And high level, it's an interoperability protocol. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to send payments across different networks, across different blockchains, and across different financial networks that are not blockchains. And I really like that idea. It's mirrored very heavily by the design of the Internet Protocol itself. And I have a longer talk that I've recently given at a conference in Australia that goes into a little bit of detail with that. I'll link up to the videos after this. But I really like this protocol, and I met one of the creators, Evan Schwartz, at the conference, and he was one of the kindest, smartest people in the crypto community that you can meet. And so he gave me a really good deep dive into this protocol, and we continued conversations, and then he introduced me to his other partner who helped him create Interledger, who's Stefan Thomas, and we started working closer together. And Stefan is now working on a project called Coil, and Coil is focused on how can you monetize content in a better way. And it deserves a separate topic. We don't have too much time, so I'm going to just like link you to a few things that you can check out later. But the sort of like few components that are key to Puma Browser, that is Interledger Protocol, Coil, and our Twitter account, where we have a lot of loyal and vocal folks who are tweeting and retweeting things that we're publishing, which you should join and check out all the final links. And on this Tuesday, we finally launched our iOS version. We've been in development since February in active development. We launched our beta in April, and on this Tuesday, we finally launched a much better V2 of Puma Browser, and I'm going to show you a quick demo if the internet cooperates. So one of the fun things to do in Puma Browser, you can go to pumabrowser.com, and you can see a screenshot of Puma Browser in Puma Browser to make things very complicated. And if the internet, let's see real quick. Oh no, not signed into Coil. Sorry about that. So this is live demo in the simulator. I was trying to mirror my phone, but let me see real quick if I can get this to work. So you log in. So to use Puma Browser, for now you have to use a Coil account. If you have a Coil account, you sign in with Coil, and what you'll notice is when you go to a site that supports web monetization, at the bottom left corner, you'll see this counter. And this is actually real money that is going from my phone to the creator of the site. A better example is if you go to XRP Community Blog, the website itself is built by Wietse, and so when you're browsing the homepage, the payment is streamed to his account, and he's getting paid. 1 minute, excellent. And if you go to an individual blog post, let's say in this case by Hodor, he's a very prolific writer. In this case, the money is being streamed to Hodor, and this is what's available today. It's already working. You sign up for Coil, and you can use our browser, and you can browse the web and support creators directly. And our hope is to build an alternative business model for the web where it's not driven by ads, but it's driven by your contribution directly to the creator. Because the problem with ads is that the ad-driven companies have to know everything about you, and you can't really expect privacy on the web if the main business model is that the companies have to know everything about you to sell you something. And so I think we can move to a world where there's more privacy and there's more collaboration between people directly, as opposed to having this like side interest of other companies involved. Thank you so much.
So we have time for a couple questions.
Do you,
yes, please.
Do you have a solution for identity and reputation?
Yes.
Just like I don't know a lot about Interledger, but I know that it doesn't have like those solutions baked in.
Yeah.
And so do you have like something for that?
So the question is like, do we have a solution for identity and reputation in the Interledger network? So we ourselves don't currently focus on that. For now, we're partnering with Coil and other companies. So you like when you sign in with Coil, sort of like Coil does the identity part of things. I think us or other companies will definitely start working on some solutions towards that. It's a very big problem, but the beauty of the Interledger protocol and the Interledger ecosystem that it's an open standard, and if you join, you can participate in solving that problem. Please.
Yeah, how does a content creator sign up and implement it on their end on the website?
Great question. Yeah, so how does content creator implement things on their site? So right now, the easiest way, if you want to have sort of like a medium-like experience, you go to coil.com and you can publish there. If you have your own blog, there's a few things you can do. The simplest step is to add a payment pointer to your site. That way, you're not gating content, but anybody who has a Coil account or Chrome browser account can come into your site and contribute. And you need to specify a payment pointer, which is like the address where you receive the payment. There's a few providers that make it really easy to create a wallet for that. And yeah, and then you can do more complex things where you can start monitoring if a person is streaming your payments or not. And depending on that, you can update the content.
So are they inserting something into their website, or are they just going to the Coil or Puma?
So as a content creator?
Yeah.
So as a content creator, it depends on like, do you have your own site?
Sure.
Or if you have your own site, then all you need is to specify a payment pointer.
Oh.
And then you can start like also like you can make more complex where like if somebody is using web monetization, I'm not gonna show them ads. I'm gonna give them more content, something like that. But if you don't have your own website, then you can go to coil.com, which is just a reference implementation, like an example. Where you can.
There should be like a WordPress widget or something.
Yeah, we're working on that too. Yeah, and we'll be publishing more information. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. We'll be publishing more on like how to monetize your site and some like.
Okay.
Yeah. Totally. Same for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And so this is our final scheduled lightning talk for the morning session. There's another session that starts at 3 p.m. I think. So please join me in welcoming John to speak on re-liberating scholarly works.
Thank you. This talk is about how we link to content persistently. Why do we care? Because as early as 1997, a study claimed that the average life of a URL was 44 days. This is the time the URL would take to return the dreaded 404 not found error. So this is very bad for institutions like university and national libraries who are charged with the long-term stewardship of the scholarly and cultural record. So in 1997, the web was new, and a panic sort of took hold. Because people love the web. In the rush to find a so-called persistent identifier, 10 silly notions took hold that have been misguiding decision makers and still doing it today. The list of fallacies has been posted here last year. There's so many of them that I don't have time to go into them. Meanwhile, not everyone remembers that Tim Berners-Lee didn't have much to say about so-called persistent identifiers. He simply wrote, cool URIs don't change. So I'm a computer scientist working at the University of California in the California Digital Library. So it's based, as I said, at the University of California. That's 10 campuses, hundreds of museums, galleries, observatories, 5 medical centers, 5 law schools, 3 national laboratories, a lot of people. And 10% of the US research output is produced by the University of California. It's a lot. Meanwhile, the University of California has a long history of openness. the free speech movement in 1968, 1982. This is 12 years before the word open source was coined. I was fortunate enough to be working on Berkeley Unix, now running in everyone's Mac. I've got three or four pieces of software running on everybody's Mac right now. In 2013, the University of California did a groundbreaking open access policy, stating that all UC researchers had their legal right to publish preprints of their publications in open access journals. In 2019, in fact, 2 weeks ago, the largest academic publisher of the most prestigious journals, we terminated our contract with them. It's a very bold move. We're hoping that the rest of the world will follow us. So anyway, meanwhile, so 50% of the 50,000 articles per year are published by the University of California, and only 15% of them are freely available. So less well known in this whole is the way that the publishing industry has foisted another bit of nonsense on us and has gotten people to swallow this, institutions, rich and poor, is that in order to create persistent identifiers, you need to give up control and you need to pay for URLs, per URL. So instead, the University of California has been offering a decentralized identifier called ARC identifiers, which I will talk about. But motivating it, long ago in 1990, there was no free instant access to the vast body of knowledge we take for granted today. But by the late 90s, the web was rapidly becoming what we know today. It wasn't just about access, but also about ease of online publishing. Before the web, publishing was usually a formal process with explicit permissions, payments, rights transfers. So the web was hugely liberating for people who just wanted to put stuff out there. But web links breaking in large numbers led many people to conclude that URLs are inherently unreliable. It's kind of nonsense. It's like saying we should ban English because there's so much bad writing. In the rush for relief, many put their faith in purely technical solutions called link resolvers. The idea was to route all access through an identifier scheme's own resolver, which would take care of web redirection. But these were choke points. They were antithetical to the emerging spirit of sharing on the web. So these are generally not community owned, and they came with fees. You pay your fee, you think you've outsourced persistence, but you're still on the hook for all the hard work, which is updating a redirection table. The one trick they could do is redirection, and that was baked into the earliest web servers, and it's given away for free by hundreds of URL shortening services, all at much larger scale. So what prevents our community from just forming a group to rent a hostname persistently and park a simple redirecting server there? Configure it to specialize in redirection, right? So that's just what we did. 18 years ago, in fact. So instead of succumbing to the mythology, we created this ARC identifiers in the spirit of the open internet. It also aligns very naturally with the decentralized web because it's totally decentralized. No one resolver needs to own it. How do you tell when an ARC is just a URL? You tell it by the internal label. It's got a name assigning authority number, opaquely identifying who produced it. It's got an actionable bit that's a resolver. And it's got a core global unique identity that will outlast even HTTP. So ARCs break this siloed paywall paradigm followed by most persistent identifier schemes. You don't pay to create URLs, and you don't pay to create ARCs. You can run your own resolver, and many people do so, or you can hire a vendor to do it. What about community? For the past year, the California Digital Library and the DoorSpace Foundation have been looking to create a nonprofit so that CDL isn't the only organization supporting this. It's called ARCs in the Open. The goal is to build this open international community to sustain ARCs. We have 3 working groups, advisory group, a bunch of organizations on 4 continents, and so we're pursuing standardization as an internet draft, going to push it to RFC status. And we welcome your participation. Questions?
So we have time for questions.
Okay. So this is near and dear to my heart. My wife is a professor at UCSC, so down the street. And like, how does her research live on ARC? Is that something that you're leaving up to the professors, or is it the department, or the collaborators? Because there's rules, like she's working with somebody at Texas A&M and then University of Indiana, like all that. How?
It's a little complicated because if you're a professor, faculty, or research, your tenure and promotion often depends on your publishing record directly. And the publishing industry, so you got to apply, you got to publish in prestigious journals. That's why Elsevier's had a lockdown, because they had the prestige journals. And they publish under the DOI identifier, which is double paywalled. So you don't have access to that. They publish, they pay that fee. If you're a smaller outfit and doing like a local publishing or a society publishing, they have more choices. So that kind of publisher would choose to use this identifier scheme. So you'd want the people that you know who are publishing to say, well, let's opt for an open access journal, maybe one of the smaller ones. Let's move in that direction. It's not so easy to influence the larger publishers, except maybe, pointing things out, raising consciousness, that sort of thing.
So you still have to go through the publication process?
Yeah, a lot of times
storage?
You want tenure and promotion, you're gotta follow the rules that the publishing industry has set up for you. It's a stranglehold that people are trying to break in a number of ways. Libraries are trying to change the tenure and promotion process, the publisher parish mentality, but that's moving on several fronts, so it's a little bit complicated to do that.
So she's wanted to publish in one of those top journals.
Yeah,
She can't?
then she's got no influence over their choice of identifier. She does have choice over her research data, because research data is often published in a sort of data publishing stream that takes place with smaller publishers who are just coming into play, and she could have more choice there. Yeah.
The identifier, you had a part that depends on the publisher, you said. You had like two.
Well, the assigning, whoever assigned it, that's an assigning bit. But the actual actionability, that's determined by this bit, and this is a changeable bit, that's mutable. This is the immutable part.
But you still identify the institution that assigned the
that
unique
assigned
part.
it originally, yeah.
So it's not like anybody can create its own ID for the document. You have to go through some.
Well, what we do, it's a very lightweight registry. Basically, you fill out a form. The form comes to CDL, and you get assigned a unique 5-digit number that identifies your institution in perpetuity. You don't pay for that. You get it within 24 hours, and that's a one-time thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit centralized, so
Okay.
I don't quite understand. I wish someone would address this sort of dynamic between where does centralization and decentralization stop and start, because you've always got to have some kind of starting point, right?
I don't understand what is the role of the institution assigned. Can you just hash the document or something like that?
Oh, right.
And make it
Right. A lot of people think that's how it works, but most curated collections in libraries they cannot possibly use the content-based addressing because documents are mutable, the metadata is mutable. It goes through all kinds of changes. Maybe it's stupid, maybe they're unnecessary, maybe they're making work for themselves, but that's the current reality. So content-based addressing doesn't work for most library and archival collections. It does work much better for NDN and the sort of file base where no human hands are touching things, and there's a lot. I'm not quite sure what the middle ground is. Works well for software because Git hashes and so forth. Yeah.
Interesting.
Any more questions?
Where does it live? Is UC's servers running and holding these?
So you can run your own resolver. So this is one resolver that CDL happens to run, but most people don't use it. Most people they create one of these, and like the genealogists in Utah, they have their own family search. They have 3.2 billion ARCs, and they run their own servers. So they don't touch any of our infrastructure. Once they've gotten their 5-digit number, and they got that 10 years ago.
And instead of into TNet, they have
it's familysearch.org. Yeah.
Is there a protocol that communicates between the servers to sync them up, like DNS or something? Or?
There's no protocol needed.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is no federation going on.
No federation.
Yeah. So that's actually a slight problem if you were using DOIs or handles. It's very centralized, so they know exactly how many handles and DOIs there are in the world, and but it's there's exclusive access and paywalls. We don't know that, so we are trying to mount a project where you can voluntarily sort of opt in to tell us, give us information about how many you have, so we can report better. We don't know how many ARCs there are in the world.
It looks like a DNS type system. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's the, I don't know if you're aware, the URN spec was a kind of persistent identifier.